Whoa, that nearly wore me out, that did. Amazing, amazing. I'm speechless. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. And so as we begin, I hope you don't mind a barefoot speaker. It's pretty hot up here. So this afternoon, I'm going to take you a little bit further than what I did yesterday. Yesterday I showed you what happens to our food when it gets into our gastrointestinal tract. And now I'm going to show you what happens when it gets out of our gastrointestinal tract and gets into the blood and goes to the cell, because it's a fascinating process. And as Proverbs 14 verse 6 says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. When you understand these processes, you begin to have the knowledge on how to give the body the right conditions. The same power that upholds nature is working also in man. The same great laws that guide alike star and atom controlled human life. The laws that govern the action of the heart, regulating the current of flow of life to the body, are the laws of the mighty intelligence that has jurisdiction of the soul. From him all life proceeds. Only in harmony with him can be found its true sphere of action. To all objects of his creation, the requirements are the same. A life exercised in harmony with the Creator's will, a life sustained by receiving life from the Creator. To transgress his law, whether it be physical or mental or moral, is to place oneself out of harmony with the universe, to invite discord, anarchy, and ruin. Majestic words. That's a paragraph taken from the book Education, page 100. But notice what that last sentence says: to transgress his law, to break his law, whether it be physical or mental or moral, is to place oneself out of harmony with the universe, to invite discord, anarchy, and ruin, because the whole of the planet runs according to law. The universe runs according to law. Adhering to law brings harmony. And the law of the digestive tract is no different. And we saw yesterday the conditions required for proper stomach function, and the decisions we make regarding what goes in the mouth and how it affects all the way down. And so there are certain rules or laws in natural health regarding further inside the body. So as we begin, let us ask the greatest teacher this world has ever known to teach us. Father, thank you so much. Thank you so much for our gastrointestinal tract. Thank you so much for the blood. Thank you so much for the nutrients. Thank you so much for the cell. Give us understanding as we go into detail in these areas, is our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. I'd like to begin by going to the Garden of Eden. And I'd like to have a look at the food that God gave Adam and Eve, because I do not think we can improve on that Garden of Eden diet. And for people who are carnivores and people who say to me, but the carnivore diet, all meat, I said, do you love God? Oh, very, very much. And you're looking forward to heaven? Very, very much. Well, I've got some disappointing news. There'll be no meat in heaven, because to eat meat there has to be a death. And there was no death in the Garden of Eden. And God said in Genesis 1:29, he said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed and every tree, in the which of the trees a fruit-bearing seed. To you it shall be for meat. When the Bible talks about animal meat, it talks about flesh. So when it says meat, it's actually referring to the main substance of our food. So let's have a look at the herb-bearing seed. So we're going to have a look at the foods. We're going to have a look at the protein content. We're going to have a look at the carbohydrate content. And we're going to make an assessment on this food and see why God says to you it shall be for meat. So a seed is a grain. A seed is also a legume. A seed is also a seed. And herb-bearing seed is a nut. So there are so many grains. There's wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, millet, quinoa. And if you go to Africa, there's corn, there's teff. There's so many grains. And these grains are high in protein, but they are also very high in carbohydrate. What is a legume? A legume, often called a bean, is lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans. So they're your legumes. They are high in protein and they are medium to low in carbohydrate. And a seed, that's pumpkin seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flax seed, high in protein and low in carbohydrate. And we have so many nuts. We've got pecan nuts, walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, Brazil nuts, cashew nuts, high in protein, low in carbohydrate. And we know that the diet also includes, because every herb-bearing seed, there's your vegetables as part of that, and also the fruits, fruit-bearing tree. And that gives us a totally balanced diet. And as I mentioned to you earlier in the week, the 3 essential food groups. What are the 3 essential food groups? Fibre. Yesterday we had a look at our gastrointestinal tract. We saw the importance of fibre. We saw the importance of fibre feeding our microbiome, our microorganisms. We saw the importance of fibre sweeping and massaging our large intestine. Protein. Protein is also an essential nutrient. Let's go to the cell for a moment and do an assessment of the cell. 50% of the membrane around the cell is protein. And when you have a look at how a new cell is made, it's built up by amino acids, which is a breakdown of the protein we eat. Fat is also an essential nutrient. We've also looked at the dangerous myth that we should not be eating fat. We showed that first was introduced to reduce heart disease, and it hasn't done that at all. We also looked at the fact that the fattiest organ in the body is the brain. And since people have been on this low-fat, fat-free diet, the brain's deteriorating. We see that in the amount of Alzheimer's and dementia cases that are around. No, fat is an essential nutrient. You see, 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat. You can't function without fat. You can't live without fat. It's an essential nutrient. I'd like to now do an assessment of what many people are eating today. And I see this almost wherever I go. It's a high carbohydrate diet. So carbohydrate, let's do a carbohydrate assessment. So many people reach for a very quick breakfast. It's called cereal or bread. And it amazes me how we've come to a time on planet Earth where we seem to have plucked the carbohydrate part out of every traditional diet and put it all together, because carbohydrates aren't bad. They've always been a part of traditional diet, but we seem to have lumped them all together. Mid-morning, because cereal and bread won't take you far, people are reaching for cakes, cookies, biscuits, donuts, croissants, etc., pretzels. Every plane I'm on, I'm offered the little quick carbohydrates, chips, pretzels, lots of pretzels. Pizza. Pizza's another quick food that we see in the cities. Pasta, I don't think there's a home without pasta today. Potatoes. I'm a fifth generation Australian Scottish descent. Potato was part of every main meal. I'm married to an Irishman now. Potato has to be part of every main meal. Rice. I'm sure if I grew up in Asia, rice would be a main part of my meal. Now, last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid extracted from the sugarcane plant. All of these break down in the gastrointestinal tract to a singular structure called glucose. Yesterday we had a look at how the salivary amylase starts the carbohydrate digestion and the pancreatic amylase finalizes it, brings it down to tiny little substances absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. Then it travels to the cell. And when it gets to the cell, there's a hormone called insulin. And insulin is the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose inside the cell. Once the glucose is inside the cell, then it goes through a 20-step pathway. And this 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. We looked at that this morning. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into what's often called the powerhouse of the cell, because this 8-step pathway delivers a very impressive 36 units of energy. And as we looked at this morning, it is oxygen that makes the difference. What a difference oxygen makes. This pathway, no oxygen. So the first place that the glucose is sent is to the cell. But on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got a lot of glucose left over. And so now it gets stored in the cell as glycogen. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores. These are little molecules of glucose already sitting in your muscle cell. In your muscle cell, it's like it's in a prison. It can only be used by your muscle cell. But the liver, let's just get the edge of the liver here. Here's the liver. The liver can also store glycogen, but it can only store so much. But this glycogen, it can be sent all over the body, whereas this glycogen can only be used by the body. Remember what it is? It's quick-release glucose stores. And that's why I did not need to eat before I went on my morning exercise this morning, because I've got a nice store of glycogen stores already in my cell, just waiting to be plucked. It's an amazing system. So the second place that the glucose is sent is to the cell or to the liver to be stored as glycogen. That's why when your children say they're starving between meals, it doesn't mean you have to give them food because there's a really nice storehouse in there. And remember what we looked at yesterday, the stomach needs a rest. But we've still got glucose left over because only so much can be stored in the muscle, only so much can be stored in the liver. We have still got glucose left over. So now it's stored in the most amazing fuel depot in the human body. It's called fat cells. And on this high carbohydrate diet, what's happening to Americans today? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So are Australians. 68% of Australians are either overweight or obese. I don't think anyone chose to eat this way. I just think it's there, it's quick, it's handy. And that's what people want. There's your fast food. But when I was home in the rainforest when my children were little, this was not fast food. It takes a while to make cereal. If we were travelling, I would make, I think you call it granola, we call it muesli. It'd take me all afternoon to rub the dates and oil in through the oats and then bake it in a very slow oven. It took me all afternoon, but it was quick quick food on the road. You just pour milk on it. Takes a while to make bread, especially if you're making the traditional sourdough or cultured bread. That can take a couple of days. Cakes, etc. Takes a while. My husband's very happy I'm coming home. I'll be home on Tuesday because when I'm home, I make an apple pie once a week. He says he's suffering at the moment. He hasn't had an apple pie for a few months. But it takes a while. It takes a while to make them. It takes a while to make pizza. If you're going to make pasta from scratch, that takes a while. It takes a while to cook potatoes. It takes a while to make rice. To cook rice. This is not fast food, but in the city, it's just there, it's just quick, and it's just very easy. And I think that's why so many people have fallen in to eating this way. It's just quick, it's just fast. And when people say to me, I don't know why I'm sick, I'm a vegan. Well, I don't call myself a vegan anymore. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and it was all plant-based, all vegan. And then they had a carrot cake for dessert. And on the top was this white fluff. And I said, what's that? They said, oh, Barbara, it's vegan. It's vegan. I said, I know cow's cream. I know coconut cream. But what's that? Then they brought me this spray can. You just press the button and out comes white fluff. And I looked at that. I looked at the spray can. I read the ingredients. Whoa. That's when I discovered chemicals are vegan. Cheap seed oils are vegan. Refined sugar's vegan, and that's just about what that fluff was made up of. I said, I'll just have the carrot cake, thank you. And since that experience, I do not call myself vegan anymore. I call myself plant. And it's like one house. They said, we've got lots of food for you, Barbara. I opened the fridge. Plastic pretend meat, plastic pretend cheese. I said, look, I love cooking. Can I cook? I said, show me, where are your lentils? Where are you? When I left, that was all still in the fridge. And every day I cooked the most beautiful food. And every day the father's saying to his wife, did you get the recipe? Did you get the recipe for this one? The good news is in the back of Self-Heal by Design, I've put a lot of my favourite legume recipes. I love cooking. And someone said, Barbara, you're such a good cook. And I said, yeah, that's because I like food. And God gave us taste buds for a reason. And how often does the food taste great, but it's killing you? Or it's really good for you, but it is so boring. And one of the reasons I think plant foods become so boring is because we've been told fat and salt are no good. Is that right? A man came up to me in the break, he said, we've been spun many lies. I said, that's why yesterday I had to give you the story of the war in heaven. Of that there's a deceiver there that's deceived the whole world. I love cooking, but I'm not in the kitchen much, and I'm not interested in being in the kitchen all day long. In fact, if I'm going to serve lunch at 1:30, 1:30, I'll come in at 12, and I'll start the oven and put the potatoes and the sweet potatoes on, and I've got lentils cooking there, and then I'll go out and maybe I'll spend another 3/4 of an hour in the garden. And then I'll come back in the last half hour. I'll cook a quick sauce, onion, garlic, ginger, maybe some tomatoes, fresh herbs, rinse the lentils, throw them in, put some Celtic or Baja salt in, put a nice lot of olive oil, blump, 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 got that? And it makes the food fantastic. And then I'll put the salad together. My husband comes in at 1:30 and there's baked potatoes, baked sweet potatoes, a beautiful big rich lentil thing and a big salad and a lovely dressing. Doesn't take long. It doesn't take long at all. It's just pre-thought. It's just looking ahead. Do you know, at breakfast, we should be thinking about lunch. And when we go to bed at night, before we go to bed, we think, okay, what am I going to have tomorrow? Do I need to soak some beans? Do I need to... Doesn't take long. Doesn't take long at all. When you go home, soak a whole lot of beans. Overnight, in the morning, rinse them. And then rinse them very well and just freeze them in little cup packets. Or if you're going to be home all day, bring them to the boil, rinse them again, bring them to the boil, cook them till they're soft, and then put them in little packets. There's so much that you can do for shortcuts because we are a busy society. There's no doubt about it. We have a busy life today. But what's also very important is looking after this body. Because if we look after the body, it's going to look after us. Now, what I'm about to show you may surprise you, and it may not surprise you. I've shown you the 3 essential food groups. What's the non-essential? What does non-essential mean? It means you can actually live without it, but I don't suggest you do. It's the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not bad. Now, I hope no one missed that, because some people have quoted me as saying, Barbara says carbohydrates are bad. Did I say that? No, I didn't. Carbohydrates are not bad. My husband would never forgive me if the potatoes stopped. They'd throw me out of Asia if the rice stopped. No, they're not bad. It's just when they're overdone and refined, that's the problem. Cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea. What's that? It's 100% carbohydrate. And on this high carbohydrate diet, often the people are missing out on the 3 essentials and overdoing the non-essential. An easy way to do it is to increase the legume, nut, seed part of the meal and decrease the grain part of the meal. That's an easy way to do it. And because that's a non-essential, that's the negotiating part of the meal. And then the negotiations change depending on your height, depending on your size, depending on your weight, depending on your sex, depending on your physical, mental output through the day. I was pregnant or breastfeeding non-stop for 14 years. I ate a lot more carbs then than I eat now. I'm only a little tiny lady. I do not need many carbs. In fact, I eat a very low carbohydrate diet. I eat high fiber, generous proteins, great fats. Why do I do that? Well, 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. It works well for me. I sleep very well. I have lots of energy. The weight just stays the same. The brain works. So what's the body saying to me? Yeah, this is working. And if it's not working, it's time for a change. I loved what Thomas Jackson said this morning. The word rest is in stress. Did you see that? But to get rest out of stress, you've got to do some rearrangements and you've got to do some elimination. I like that. Thank you, Thomas Jackson. I love the little puns that he has with words. Excellent. You're the doctor. If it works, do it. If it doesn't work, don't do it. And as we looked at yesterday, we also looked at timing. We also looked at moderation in eating. Eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, supper like a pauper. At our Misty Mountain Health Retreat, one lady said, has it opened again? I said, it never closed. It never closed. We've got a great team there, and they run the program every week. In fact, we're averaging 20 people every week, 3 weeks a month. It's running very, very nicely. And because we're getting that many people, we've been able to build a new steam bath. We've been able to do a few great extensions to the property. And a common email we get. Now remember, we feed our breakfast at 7:30 in the morning. We give our guests lunch at 1:30, and then in the evening we serve a thin soup. We cook a lot of vegetables in a lot of water for about 4 hours, then strain it, because our guests do a steam sauna every afternoon, so there's the big sweat. You don't have to do a sauna here, do you? Just come up here on the stage and you'll get a good sauna workout. I know why the Indians wear this little outfit, because it's so cool. I was in India a month ago and was gifted this little outfit, and it's just perfect for the very hot weather. So the understanding this process, and when we go back to the Garden of Eden diet, you can see when God said to you, these seeds shall be for meat, meaning the main substance of your food, because these are foods that are all high in fibre, generous amounts of protein, especially those last three, and great fats are found in your seeds and nuts. So in the Garden of Eden diet, God didn't say, behold, I've given you wheat. He said, I've given you every herb-bearing seed. So we need to have a variety rather than just one. But that brings me to another point. I want to look at the grain that most cereal is made out of, most bread is made out of, most cakes, and we could do lots of these croissants, muffins, biscuits, cakes, cookies, pretzels. They're all made out of the same grain, as is pizza, as is pasta, and that is wheat. So I want to show you what happened to the wheat. It was in the 1950s. Dr. Norman Borlaug, he put wheat through intensive crossbreeding. Why? He wanted to create a plant with a high yield of grain to help with the starvation crisis in Africa, in India, in Mexico. At first, you see, when I was a little girl, the wheat used to grow that high. And at first, the stalk just kept breaking before they could harvest the grain because it was so heavy. So back to the drawing board, and eventually they've got a plant only grows this high. You look at wheat in America today, how high does it grow? Only that high. It's got a thick stem and 6 to 8 times more grain per plant. That's 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. That's 6 to 8 times more money per acre. So in 1970, when Dr. Norman Borlaug got his Nobel Prize for this wheat, it went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every cereal, bread, and all the rest, pizza, pasta, it's all made out of this hybridized wheat. It was rushed through with no safety studies. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? You know that Robert Kennedy Jr. has just sacked the 17 members of the committee that tests vaccine. Did you know that? I think that was 2 weeks ago. Because most of them are on the payroll of the pharmaceutical company. Did you know that? And did you know that those vaccines are not put through vigorous testing like most drugs go through? Notice that I said most drugs go through. And this is one of the reasons why 50% of our children are sick. Did you know that? That is alarming. Absolutely alarming. So it's got a lot to do with that. So we're very thankful for what Robert Kennedy Jr. has done, is doing, and aims to do. Now back to the food that we are eating. With the food that we are eating, that is predominantly made out of wheat, the fact that it was rushed through with no safety studies, they didn't think they had to do any safety studies on wheat, but only now are we starting to see the problem. There's a book called Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter. There's another book called Gut and Psychology. There's another book called Stop Alzheimer's Now, Stop Autism Now by Dr. Bruce Fife. All of these books show the link between wheat and mental illness. But that's another subject. And we'll look at that a bit tomorrow, but you'll see a bit now in what I'm about to show you. There's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis, and it's an excellent book that just traces the story of what happened to the wheat. So what happened to the wheat? Two main things. One is the protein or the gluten structure changed, and that is why we see so much gluten sensitivity, gluten intolerance, and also celiac. In fact, it was never seen before wheat was hybridized. I've got a friend who's a doctor. She's just retired. She's allowed to retire. She was 78. She's in her early 80s now. She said, 40 years ago, you never heard of gluten intolerance. 20 years ago, you were starting to hear of it. Today, if you want to look at a true epidemic, not a pretend pandemic, if you want to look at a true pandemic, it would have to be gluten intolerance. And there are many people that don't even know they've got it. It's just that their skin rash has been diagnosed as eczema or psoriasis, but it actually is a gluten intolerance. Or they've been diagnosed with celiac, been diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, colitis, but it's actually a gluten intolerance. Even as Dr. David Perlmutter in his book Grain Brain shows the link between schizophrenia and a gluten intolerance. Wow, this thing's big, but that's not what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about the other change that was made in the hybridization of the wheat, and that is the starch structure. So the starch is like the sugars. So in the starch structure, there was a starch created in the hybridization of the wheat called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. So let's say this is average. Amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, then you've always got a corresponding dump. That's the A. Amylopectin A. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes. And if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, the glycemic index of food is a reading on how quickly the glucose in that food is released into the blood. And amylopectin B, it has foods fairly high in the glycemic index, like bananas and potatoes. If you're familiar with bananas and potatoes, they get the blood glucose level up fairly high very fast. If you're not a diabetic, doesn't matter, but if you're a diabetic, that can make a big difference. So amylopectin B, found in bananas and potatoes, gets it up relatively high, relatively fast, then you get a relatively low. Amylopectin C is found in chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, all your legumes. That gives a lovely steady rise, lovely steady maintenance, lovely steady drop. Every cell in the body requires, desires, functions best on a steady, sure delivery of fuel. One man said to me, health retreat I was running about 10 years ago, he was in his 60s, he said, I came to a health retreat when I was in my 40s. I was told I had pre-diabetes and to start eating legumes every day. He said, I did. He said, I never developed diabetes because those legumes, those beans, they give a lovely, steady, sure delivery of fuel. Just a note on legumes, they need to be very well rinsed, very well rinsed. When I married Michael 28 years ago, he said, I can handle red lentils, I can handle lima beans, I can handle kidney beans, I can't handle chickpeas, and I can't handle lentils. And I said, really? Okay, well, let's do something about that. So when I cooked lentils, I gave him a teaspoon. That's all. A teaspoon. And he didn't bloat, he didn't react. Next week, 2 teaspoons. The next week, 3 teaspoons. The next week, 4 teaspoons. He can now eat lentils. And I did the same thing with chickpeas. I started little. What did I do? I actually woke up and revived the microorganisms in his gut that are responsible for processing the lentils and the chickpeas. So if there are foods in the legume department you have trouble with, start small. Start small, but they must be well rinsed. When I bring mine first to the boil, you know all the white fluff on the top? Guess what that is? Wind. Wash it away. Wash it away. Halfway through cooking, I rinse it again. And when it's almost finished cooking, I give it a light rinse, and then I put those into my sauce, whether it be a dal, whether it be a curry, whether it be a cashew milk with garlic and marjoram and broccoli, or whether it be a rich tomato sauce. There's so many things you can do with legumes. And I know when I first came to Tennessee, this is 2016, 15, and they served legumes, it was very boring. Boiled beans. That's it. Boiled beans. And I don't think they'd rinse them because that night I had a bloated stomach. There's a way to prepare them so that digestion works very well. It's all about reviving those microorganisms in our gut that are responsible for those foods. And if you are like me, I didn't even know what a lentil was till I was about 23. I thought everyone in the world ate the way I was brought up, which was cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, chops or sausages, mashed potato, frozen peas or beans every night of the week. Everyone I knew ate like that. But when I was 17, I had a boyfriend who had a friend who was a vegetarian. I'd never heard of a vegetarian. And then I went to a vegetarian restaurant. And in that vegetarian restaurant, I tasted food that I had never heard of. Hunza pie, cauliflower or gratin. My whole world opened up. I was brought up on a fairly boring diet. Food should be good. It should be such that it's going to feed our cells. It's going to be such that it's a nourishment that can maintain our body, but not only maintain our body, if it's not well, to heal our body. It's the building blocks of the body are the fibers with all their minerals, are the proteins with their amino acids, they're the building blocks. And the protein are also, they make up the little neurotransmitters that flash from cell to cell in our brain. And the fat, because the fat makes up 50% of that membrane around every cell in the body. No, carbohydrates are not bad. They're the ones you negotiate. So obviously, if you've got teenage boys in your house, but they're not going to put on much muscle unless you're giving them protein. My son James inherited my body type, little. No boy wants to be little. And he started working out. He started working out big time and supplementing with protein. Well, he's big now. He's very muscly now. And he's just got a new little baby. And he holds that little baby and his arm is bigger than the baby. He changed his body type. Notice the 2 things he did. He worked out. He worked out big time and he supplemented with protein. Every bodybuilder knows they've got to supplement with protein. Now this rings very similar to a diet called the ketogenic diet. You heard the ketogenic diet? The ketogenic diet has been used for over 100 years to help control epilepsy. Did you know that? Used to help control epilepsy. And this diet is a very low carbohydrate diet. Great fibre because you've got to sweep this gut. Generous amounts of protein and also great fats. In his book Stop Autism Now and Stop Alzheimer's Now, Dr. Bruce Fife shows that this ketogenic diet can help to turn Alzheimer's and dementia around, and how it can also help to turn around autism. First 3 chapters of his book, Stop Autism Now, is looking at the causes. The first 3 chapters of his book are about the childhood vaccinations. Because in every case, 99% of the time, he came back to these childhood vaccinations because they contain a lot of things. You go to the pharmacist and get a printout of what's in them. You will not want that in your baby. But formaldehyde and aluminium, both neurotoxins, both in those childhood vaccines. There is a claim that in 1998 they banned mercury, which is thimerosal it's called. They banned mercury in childhood vaccinations, but there are also some claims that it's still in there. It's certainly still in the flu vaccine. So these are poisons that should never enter the human body. If the human body's been designed to heal itself, we don't need to give those childhood shots. But didn't they stop the childhood illnesses? No, they didn't. What stopped the childhood illnesses was Florence Nightingale introducing hygiene, sanitation and nutrition in the British hospitals. Because did you know that in the 1850s all the sewage from Thames, the main river in London, and all the people living in London drank the water out of the Thames? That's only in the 1850s. 150 years ago. Phew. And then they put a big sewage system under London. Notice we don't have infectious diseases anymore. It's not because of those childhood shots. It's because of the increase in hygiene, sanitation and nutrition. That's why we need to know our history. And in the little book, Ministry of Healing, there's a chapter called Hygiene Amongst the Israelites. And that's how Florence Nightingale knew this. She read her Bible. And she read the strict cleanliness rules that Moses gave, or God gave to Moses to give to the children of Israel. You've got to keep it clean. You've got to wash your body every day. You've got to wash your clothes every day. That's why I changed my clothes a few times, because when I come off this stage, I'm almost dripping wet from perspiration. And you know, perspiration has got a lot of waste in it. I said to Narlon, I think you better have next year's camp up under those trees. Have you walked up there? So cool under the trees. Now we know why all the cows and the sheep, on a day like this, they're under the trees. We have found many people have conquered diabetes by going on a high fibre, generous protein and healthy fat diet. They don't stop the carbohydrates, but it's not the main part of their meal. So this high sugar diet, which is, as you can see, a lot of people don't realise this high carbohydrate diet, when it is predominantly made with wheat, even when it's not refined, you're still putting the sugars in. Because that hybridized wheat has this starch structure that gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. And you will have noticed when I talked about Crohn's disease, colitis, I suggested stopping the wheat. And the reason for that is not so much the starch structure, but it's the protein or the gluten structure, which is the other structure that was changed in the hybridization of the wheat. The hybridization of the wheat created a very complex protein or gluten structure. And there's a verse in the Bible. It's John chapter 16:33. It says that the thief cometh not to kill and destroy, but Jesus said, I am come that they might have life, and that they might have life more abundantly. Do you know, the Bible talks about who this thief is. I mentioned the thief as also the great deceiver, but the Bible gives another illustration, and that's found in 1 Peter 5, starting at verse 6. It says, humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due season. Verse 7 says, cast all your care upon him, for he cares for you. But verse 8 says, be sober, be vigilant, knowing that your adversary, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeing whom he can devour. And then the Bible says, whom resist, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. And when you have a look at the deception that's come through in the food that we're eating, it's not only this high carbohydrate diet that is everywhere, it's also what has happened to the wheat. A few years ago, in 2016, I was in Bermuda and I was describing what happening to the wheat. And afterwards, a doctor approached me. He said, you're wrong on the wheat. He said, Jesus said he was the bread of life. I said, he is the bread of life. But the bread he's referring to is not the bread we have today. You see, traditional bread in the Bible was always the sourdough or the cultured bread. And you know, Jesus gave a couple of illustrations on this. He says, know you not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump? That's the sourdough. And he also gave the illustration he gave lots of illustrations. He said the kingdom of heaven is like a woman that took some leaven and put it in a meal, and it leavened the whole lump. And let's go to the Old Testament. So Moses is in the desert for 40 years with millions of Israelites and a few hanger-oners. And once a year they celebrated the Passover. And they celebrated the night that the angel passed over the doors that had the blood on the doorpost. They celebrated the Passover. How did they celebrate it? They had to put all leaven out of their homes for 1 week. What was the leaven? Do you ever wonder what the leaven was? It could only have been one thing, and that's the sourdough starter. And I can imagine those ladies with their little maybe clay pots of their sourdough starter, maybe putting it under a bush for a week, and then coming back after a week, putting a little bit of flour, spinning it around and waiting for it to rise, and then they would put some of that in their bread, and then the bread would rise, because a little leaveneth the whole lump. And that sourdough starter was a combination of lactobacillus acidophilus and wild yeast. It's the yeast that causes the rise, and the lactobacillus acidophilus consumes the waste from the wild yeast. It's actually a perfect combination. But a lot of people get confused because the writer Ellen White said bread should be light and sweet, not heavy and sour. But she's not talking about the sourdough bread. Because yeast bread's only been around since the Industrial Revolution. See, bakers didn't want to spend all night waiting for the bread to rise, so they extracted the yeast out of the sourdough culture. And now they have a bread that rises in half an hour. If you do eat that yeast bread, you must not eat it till the next day because of the yeast. But the sourdough bread, because it's a combination of wild yeast and also the lactobacillus acidophilus, a perfect combination. In fact, the same combination that's in our gastrointestinal tract. In our gastrointestinal tract, we've got bacteria like lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidus bacterium, and a whole lot of others that come from that. And we've also got Candida albicans. There are dozens of different species of candidas, these wild yeasts. in the right balance, they are not a problem. But when antibiotics come in and kill off the good bacteria, and then the person is eating a lot of these foods with its high sugar content, and how many of these are a combination of refined sugar and the wheat? Can you see that just feeds the yeast? And what's the result of that? A fungus in the toenails, athlete's foot's tinea in the toes, vaginal thrush, anal thrush, jock itch. All of these are a result of a yeast in the body. And it's often a result of someone taking a course of antibiotics. You see, my son, James, he went to the doctor because I told you he works out. Well, he overdid it a bit and his arm swelled up. And he knew what Mum used to do, and he put a grated potato poultice over his whole arm and all the swelling came down. But the elbow was still swollen. So he thought, just out of interest, never been there in his life, he'd go to the doctor. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you've got bursitis. What's bursitis? It's just inflammation of the bursa. And the bursa is the fluid around that joint. And he wrote James out an antibiotic, a script. James stood up and said, I've never taken an antibiotic in my life and I'm not about to start. And he walked out. Do you think that doctor has ever heard a 25-year-old man say that? And then he went home and rang Mum. I said, joint, ginger. Ginger for joint. And the next day, it had gone right down. My aim in producing Sustain Me, Self-Heal by Design, is on the true role of microorganisms and disease, and also cancer, which we'll touch on later tonight. But my book, Sustain Me, my aim was to produce a smallish handbook on natural remedies, so that if you do get a swollen joint, or you can actually you can look in there and you can find some simple remedies. So I'd like to tell the story of a man named Bobby that came to a retreat we're running in Alabama. He was 62. He had diabetes and he was on 90 units of insulin a day. And he was on statin drugs for cholesterol, and we showed you yesterday it's a total scam. Cholesterol does not cause heart disease. And if you want to look for the proof of that, you can go to Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. He's written many books blowing the whistle on that. They've tried to take him down twice for doing that. Did you know that? Twice they've tried to take his credentials away from him. Twice he's won the court case. I don't know about the next time, because they're quite ruthless. So this man was on 90 units of insulin a day. He was on cholesterol-lowering medication, blood thinning medication, and blood pressure medication. He was carrying about 40 pounds excess weight. He said to me, I've spent $1 million on my health in the last 10 years. Doesn't it sound like the lady that came to Jesus? She'd spent all her money on the doctors. And how many are still doing that? Because they know no better. And one thing that the doctor grabs people with is this: fear. If anyone tells you you've got 3 months to live or you're going to die if you don't do this, remember what you say? You're not God. Only He knows when I'm going to die. But thank you for your opinion. I'll consider it. And you leave. So this man, they basically could do no more for him. They basically sent him home with, what is that, almost a death sentence. There's nothing more we can do. And he was on so much medication. And he met a lady by the swimming pool. And she said, I think I know someone that can help you. Well, he immediately flew to the retreat. He immediately implemented what we suggested. He said, anything you say, I will do, because there was nothing else he could do. He'd gone to the best specialists in the land. He could afford the best. He'd gone to the best. And so he went on 2 days juicing. His legs are a bit swollen, so I got him to rebound every day. This is the health bounce, what I'm doing right now, the health bounce. If you can't jump on the little rebounder, just do the health bounce. And as you get better at the health bounce, you can start jumping. It's one of the best movers of lymphatic system. He was with us for 2 weeks. He ate a diet high in fibre, generous proteins, great fats, a little carbohydrate. At the end of 2 weeks, he was on 10 units of insulin a day. Now, he'd been told that he was a type 1 diabetic. And sometimes people are told it's an autoimmune disease and you can never cure from it. You've heard that? There is no cure. You will never heal. So if you've ever been told that, reject that immediately, because our body is very obedient to our mind, as we'll see tomorrow. He emailed me. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I am off all my medication. All medication. Type 1 diabetic he'd been diagnosed as. I said, tell me about your exercise program. Because one of the beauties of the exercise program is that it develops more receptor sites for insulin. Because when you're moving and you're moving fast, that cell needs more fuel. So it develops more insulin receptor sites. That's more glucose going in. He said, I cycle 6 miles a day, I swim 30 laps of the pool, I do 3 times 5 minutes on the rebounder. What are you prepared to put into this? Choose your hard. Life was very hard for him, injecting himself with 90 units of insulin a day, taking all that medication, no quality of life, and yes, it had even affected his sex life. And his wife was only 42. He'd stopped going to work. They didn't want him at work because he used to get so angry all the time. Because when the blood glucose levels are up, everything's fine. When the blood glucose levels are down, everyone gets screamed at. He said, I do exactly what you taught me. What an incredible result. And how simple. There's no wonder cure. It's the human body. If there is a wonder cure, it's called the human body. The human body's been designed to heal itself, and it will if you give it the right condition. When he first went home, his wife said, this is your baby. I like my champagne and croissants. Thank you very much. Well, after 3 months, she's having a look at her husband. He's lost 40 pounds. He's looking good. He's no longer angry because his blood glucose levels are stable. It is fiber, protein and fat that gives a steady, sure release of glucose. Fiber because it slowly releases the glucose. Protein because, remember, that's where it's broken down. We looked at that yesterday, in our stomach. Fat because it coats the food and takes a little bit longer. So you can easily go 5-6 hours between meals. He said, my wife's becoming interested. Do you know, this is the best way to convince your family, is your life. Or maybe I want it. This is the best way, is your life. He emailed me 6 weeks later. He said she's very excited. She's lost 10 pounds. She's doing the diet with me and we're going to get remarried because they're new people. Isn't that a beautiful story? Isn't God good? God is very, very good. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, it says, seeing then that we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. Who are the witnesses? They're the people we live with. They're our friends. They're our family. They're our workmates. They're our our relatives. They're watching. What story are you giving them? And you've probably heard the saying, preach the word, and sometimes use words. It is your life. So seeing then that we're compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and run with patience the race set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Do you hear that? When we give all to him, he starts the journey and he's going to finish it. We just need to keep our eyes on him at every step. But what I have found is that when these carbohydrates are greatly reduced, the sugar cravings also greatly reduce. The more heroin you use, the more you want. The more cigarettes you smoke, the more you want. The more sugar you eat, the more you want. The more bread you eat, the more you want. The more carbohydrates you eat, the more you want. And so it's starting to reduce that right down and implement those powerful laws of health. To transgress his law, whether it be physical or mental or moral, is to place oneself out of harmony with the universe, to invite discord, anarchy, and ruin. Keeping law keeps harmony. Once you start implementing this, you will experience the results, you will experience the rewards, and when you start experiencing that, it actually starts to become easier. You choose your hard. Let us end with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for what you've shown us. Thank you so much again for this incredible body that has everything we need. Thank you, Father, that you have promised to teach us and to guide us on our journey. We thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you.